Establishing central control immediately opens up lines for piece development. Developing a knight aggressively to control central squares and prepare for pawn breaks, setting up a flexible defense. Developing a knight to its natural square, preparing to castle and control central squares, sets up a harmonious game. A sharp response, immediately contesting the center and opening lines for queenside pressure. Opening a diagonal for the queen and establishing a central pawn chain offers dynamic play. Developing the bishop to the long diagonal opens aggressive possibilities against white's central pawn. Securing the central pawn's advance while preparing a kingside fianchetto for black's bishop. Unleashing the bishop towards the queenside dark squares adds pressure and prepares for kingside castling. Solidifying central control, this thrust prepares to exploit the queenside pawn chain. Safeguarding the king allows for dynamic play, preparing to contest the center's crucial pawn structure. Securing the king's escape square and preparing for kingside expansion, it's a prophylactic yet ambitious choice. Solidifying the pawn chain, this move prepares to challenge white's central control and allows the bishop to retreat if needed. A solid development, preparing to castle and solidifying control of the central squares while eyeing the queenside. Expanding aggressively on the queenside seeks to disrupt white's central control and create counterplay. Chasing queens toward the center often sparks early skirmishes, demanding careful calculation for both sides. Aggressively pushing the queenside pawn aims to disrupt white's central control and seize space, creating potential attacking chances. Retreating the knight aims to prepare a queenside pawn advance, but it concedes valuable central space. Striking at the queen and pinning the knight, black immediately disrupts white's queen's-rook coordination, opening avenues for further piece activity. Repositioning the queen offers flexibility, potentially supporting a kingside pawn advance or bolstering central control after the exchange on d6. Exchanging the active bishop removes a key attacking piece, simplifying the position for white but opening the e-file. Recapturing here frees the queen for more active central involvement, potentially targeting the weakened queenside. Repositioning the rook to the open file offers immediate central influence and prepares for potential pawn breaks. Developing the bishop here aims to pressure the knight on f6 and potentially disrupt black's pawn structure. Challenging the bishop's forward placement forces white's hand, potentially opening lines and creating dynamic imbalances. Exchanging the bishop on g7 weakens black's kingside pawn structure, potentially opening lines for future attacks. Solidifying the knight's position and preparing for eventual central expansion or a kingside maneuver. Securing the monarch safely anchors the position before further pawn advances or piece maneuvering. Consolidating pieces around the d7 knight aims to prepare for a central pawn push. The knight scurries to d2, rerouting towards the queenside, aiming to bolster defenses and potentially contest the open files. Asserting central influence and preparing a pawn break through the e-pawn is a sound ambition. Exchanging the bishop clears the e-file and opens lines, but grants black doubled pawns, potentially weakening their kingside structure for the future. Recapturing the bishop opens lines for your rooks and prepares for pawn advances on the queenside. Shifting the queen to d3 aims to reposition for central control and potential kingside pressure, while preparing for future pawn advances. Unlocking the e-file opens new tactical horizons for your rooks. Opening the e-file provides crucial attacking lines, but be mindful of creating weaknesses around your king. Sensing a defensive posture, this knight seeks an active outpost, threatening the weakened kingside. Unlocking the f-file for potential pressure on the weakened king seems to be the immediate aim. Opening the e-file for the rook decisively challenges white's central pawn structure and promises active counterplay. Breaking the central impasse with a pawn thrust aims to crack open the queenside and potentially liberate your pieces. A bold gambit of knights, aiming to disrupt white's central pawn structure, though it leaves the king somewhat exposed. Opening the A file immediately creates pressure, aiming to exploit the open lines for piece activity. Opening the C file now invites significant pressure on white's queenside pawns. Initiating pressure on the file, this maneuver seeks to disrupt black's queenside pawns and create tactical possibilities. Harnessing the open central files, this relocation prepares a powerful repositioning of the queen to a more active square. Activating the knight to the central square aims to disrupt black's pawn structure and pressure the queenside. Relinquishing control of the critical central squares to the opponent's rooks, this move initiates a dangerous pawn chase. Reclaiming the queen's central presence fortifies white's coordination and prepares for potential pawn advances. This knight leaps forward, threatening to disrupt white's center and seize control of key squares. Sharpening the attack, white recenters the queen, bolstering the king's defense and preparing for a potential pawn thrust on the king side. This redirection of the queen aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and contest the e4 square, potentially opening lines for black's rooks. Initiating a queen's exchange simplifies matters, aiming to neutralize black's active rook and potential mating threats. Unlocking the central file and liberating the rook to embrace active play on the open board. Seizing the open file, white launches a powerful assault on black's weakened pawn structure, aiming to unravel the position. A dramatic gamble, sacrificing a knight to rip open the kingside and create immediate attacking chaos. Shielding the monarch from the incoming knight's dangerous incursions becomes paramount. The knight's daring foray towards the king offers a dynamic tactical battle, forcing white to carefully consider their king's safety. Unlocking the king's diagonal, white forces the black monarch into a perilous corner. Acknowledging the inevitable check, black retreats the king to the relative safety of the H-file, hoping to regroup amidst this chaotic sequence. Reclaiming the central knight allows for improved piece mobility and a more active defense against black's encroaching rook. Securing the rook's advanced position, this redeployment prepares for potential counterplay on the king side. Initiating rook lift aims to dominate the 7th rank, forcing black into defensive posture. Desperate checks reveal the king's exposed position, forcing white to navigate treacherous tactical waters. Shielding the king from the rampant rook and knight activity creates a crucial breathing space. A desperate attempt to disrupt the king's safety, sacrificing material for a potential mating attack. Prioritizing king's safety over piece activity, white brings their monarch to a more secure square, preparing for a defensive stance. A bold knight sortie, aiming to disrupt the white coordination and exploit that exposed monarch. Protecting the king's sanctuary necessitates the paramount concern, even when the immediate threat appears distant. A bold repositioning to exploit the open diagonal and create immediate tactical complications around the white king. Repeating the king's retreat is a desperate attempt to stall, but it concedes valuable tempo and cedes initiative. This knight's re-entry offers a tactical reset, potentially forcing concessions or solidifying a defensive posture. Repositioning the knight to a more active square, this offers a defensive pivot and prepares for potential central advances. Re-establishing the rook's defensive posture on the 7th rank, anticipating potential knight maneuvers. Unlocking the queen's file will force a decisive exchange, creating a passed pawn. Unleashing the rook offers a dynamic counterplay, aiming to disrupt white's pawn chain and create active counterplay. Opening the central file with the rook aims to exploit the loose black king and potentially force material concessions. Relocating the bishop to this outpost aims to disrupt white's pawn chain and potentially pressure the king side. Exploiting the open c-file now opens lines towards black's vulnerable king. The rook's relocation to the d7 square aims to activate its defensive and offensive capabilities, preparing for a potential infiltration or bolstering the king's safety. Solidifying the passed pawn's advance, controlling the central files. The king seeks refuge behind its pawns as the queenside pawns begin their advance, aiming to disrupt white's central control. a probing maneuver aiming to exploit the open files and potentially trap the black rook with further coordination. Reasserting influence on the d-file, aiming to exploit white's slightly awkward rook placement and perhaps create passed pawns. Centralizing the rook finally solidifies control over the open files, a crucial step in simplifying this complex position. Grabbing the open file with the knight offers immediate counterplay and potential threats against white's centralized king. Repositioning the knight to the center aims to regroup forces and contest key squares. The knight's retreat to b6 aims to support the d-pawn and prepare for a potential exchange on c4, while also opening a line for the rook. Controlling the crucial c-file offers white immense pressure and potential for infiltration. Undertaking a gambit to disrupt white's central pawn dominance. Activating the knight to its robust central post aims to solidify the position and challenge black's active pieces. Relocating the bishop to c3 aims to activate it and potentially support a future pawn push on the queen side. Securing that central knight to pressure the advanced pawns initiates a more active endgame. This pawn push finally opens up the d-file, a critical avenue for black's rooks to exert pressure and potentially disrupt white's pawn structure. Reinforcing the rook on the 7th rank creates formidable pressure and limits black's counterplay. Sensing an opportunity, black aims to disrupt white's coordinated pieces and open lines for their own activity with this exchange. Clearing the knight allows the white king to escape the perpetual check, finally untangling this messy, tactical struggle. This bishop's repositioning aims to exploit the exposed white king and potentially create dynamic counterplay on the queen side. King's vital repositioning to escape the queenside pressure and potentially support a central advance. Prioritizing king's safety, black repositions their monarch away from the open d-file and potential checks. Fortifying the kingside pawn structure offers central control and potential for future breakthroughs. The black king ventures out, seeking an active role in the unfolding skirmish. Pushing this pawn is an attempt to gain space and open lines for the king's protection. Pushing the f-pawn gambits queenside space, potentially opening lines for the king's exposure. Solidifying the king's safety and preparing to activate the remaining pieces. A desperate attempt to activate the dormant rook, but it merely offers a target for the advancing pawns. Consolidating the rook on the 7th rank finally pins down the bishop's maneuverability. Finally, black can attempt to organize its bishop, although the king remains exposed on the kingside. Initiating a decisive rook exchange opens a direct assault on the black king's safety. Seeking refuge for the monarch behind the crumbling pawn wall. Rook on the 8th rank now exerts pressure, aiming to infiltrate black's weakened defenses. Capturing the pawn opens the f-file, potentially creating new attacking avenues for the rook if the king remains exposed. Snatching that pawn opens up the king, creating winning attacking chances. Unleashing a desperate king hunt, black attempts to exploit white's exposed monarch before the material deficit proves too great. The white king bravely advances, seeking an active role in the endgame's final skirmishes. Bumping the bishop allows for potential pressure on white's d-pawn, a crucial element in this endgame struggle. Unleashing a knight fork, this checking maneuver forces immediate material redistribution and simplifies the path to victory. Accepting the exchange simplifies the position, but opens the d-file for white's remaining rook. Removing the pawn from the 7th rank finally frees the white king to support the passed pawn's advance. The king ventures out from the safety of the flank, seeking active participation in the emerging pawn tussle. Relocating the king seeks to bolster the central pawn majority's advance. Protecting that pawn with the rook now secures a potentially useful pass pawn, even if it's currently blocked. A well-placed rook now pressures black's kingside pawn structure, aiming to disrupt its defense. Securing an extra pawn on the queenside, black now aims to reinforce their vulnerable king by creating an escape route. Sacrificing material to expose the enemy king opens a path for the rooks. The king's precarious position on the g-file invites tactical skirmishes, forcing black to maintain vigilant defense. The rook sacrifice reopens the f-file for a decisive attack on black's exposed monarch. Bringing the king closer offers a slight chance to defend the pawns, though the endgame looks grim. Propelling the pawn forward initiates a decisive endgame battle, seeking to unblock the path to victory. The pawn push offers a desperate attempt to create counterplay, but it's too late to distract from the impending regal attack. Unleashing a decisive pawn check, this final push forces the king into a dire corner, sealing the win. Pushing the pawn is a desperate attempt to break through, but the king is too exposed to offer any real defense. Bringing the rook into the attack, it aims to force the king into a mating net or to secure material gains.